Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to the first episode of the new year 2023 of In the Prog Seat. How you all doing? We've got in the house today, we've got the Professor of Prague, Ken Golden, Eric Porter, George Lemie, and Louis Nasser, our Titans of Chicago here, although Louis is still in Mexico as we speak. Louis, when are you coming back?
Still here. I fly back January 11th.
Getting a drink.
Sounds
So
good.
I'll be, but so far so good, man. It's been great.
Cool. That's the important thing. Very good. Very good. So today we're going to do a first of will hopefully be many throughout the year of kind of like album studies, right? So we're going to start really taking a look at albums, classic albums, maybe some really good albums that are kind of unknown, that maybe some of us know really well or some of us don't know well at all, that we're going to kind of listen to and kind of talk about, pull apart, that sort of thing. So today I've been kind of feeling in a Camel-ish mood of late. So I said to the team, I said, guys, how about we make the first episode of the year all about Camel-Mirage, which is Camel's second album. Some may say it's their best album or one of their best albums. This album was originally released back in 1974. Peaked on the Billboard charts at number 149, not too high, right? Not too high, but for many considered, like I said, one of their greatest albums. So what I've done is I've asked everyone to go and re-listen to this album once again. And I'm going to have everybody kind of give their thoughts, and then I will kind of circle back towards the end, and I'll have some specific questions, which I may pop throughout everybody's turn on here, just to kind of dig a little bit deeper on this particular album. So we're going to start with Eric, who we were talking before we went on the air. Eric had mentioned that he hadn't listened to Mirage in quite a long time. So Eric, why don't you kind of start us off with your kind of feelings and opinions on Camel after revisiting, or Camel-Mirage after a couple of years of not hearing it?
Well, I'm a big Camel fan. I love Andy Latimer. I love his playing. But I got into them mid to late 80s when I was in college. So after I'd kind of worked through the obvious Genesis, ELP, Yes, you kind of moved down the ladder a little bit, Gentle Giant. And I actually, funnily enough, from Happy the Man, reading about Happy the Man, Kit Watkins had a little tenure with Camel. And that was really kind of where Camel came into my view. But when I was listening to them, they were kind of non-existent. I think after, is it Stationary Traveler, they kind of fell off for about 6 years where you didn't hear anything. I don't know if they toured or played, but I don't think there was anything from kind of 84 through when Dust and Dreams came out, maybe in the early 90s. But for Mirage, obviously, I know a lot of people consider this a classic, and I'm going to pull a George. I did go out and look at Rate Your Music to see where it was ranked. It's the top album on Rate Your Music for Camel. For me, I still feel like they were kind of finding their way. There's things I really like about this. I think Free Fall is the opener, is probably my favorite track, most aggressive track, I think, on the record. I like the interplay. One of the things that I always felt maybe kept Camel from here to here were the vocals. On this record, I don't know if, because I like Andy Latimer singing now, and I know nobody would label him probably as a great singer, but I enjoy his singing. But I feel like it's almost like they hold back on the vocals a little bit, him and Barden's. But I think they share in the writing credits. I think that Free Fall is a Pete Barden's tune. And I did kind of rank the songs on here. There's only 5 tracks. There's a couple, I think Lady Fantasy and Nimmerdale have a couple extra sections to them. But for me, Free Fall is my favorite. I went with Earthrise, which is another instrumental. That was my second. Lady Fantasy is third. Fourth was Nimmerdale. That one is I've taken from Lord of the Rings, I believe, the lyrics probably, and then because it has the White Rider as part of that and a procession. And then the final one, Super Twister, is probably my least favorite. It's the most mellow track on the album, but it does give Andy Latimer, you get to hear a lot of the flute throughout that song. And Lady Fantasy, obviously, I think is kind of the iconic track that a lot of the fans latched onto for this. But for me, I honestly think I want to say my first record after having read about them might have been the Snow Goose. I know I had I Can See Your House from Here kind of early because that was a Kit Watkins record. I like Snow Goose and Mood Madness a lot better than Mirage. I would rate them higher. I mean, Mirage I rate very high, but those two are probably two of my favorites. And when I listen to Andy's playing, obviously it's there, it's coming together, but I think of tracks like Lunar Sea and Ice, and those to me kind of embody Andy's playing. And here I like what he's doing. There's just things later in the period of Camel that I enjoy his playing a lot better. And I think maybe if people aren't familiar with Camel, I think a lot of people kind of put Andy Latimer in that David Gilmour mold in a way. I think he's, at times I think you can hear on stuff like this, like Free Fall and things where he may play a little more aggressive than Gilmour a lot at times. But again, obviously you can't argue with that ranking on Rate Your Music. I mean, this is the highest ranked, and it is classic Camel. I just feel like they may have still, this is their, like you said, their second album, maybe still finding their way a little bit. And there are things I actually, when I ranked myself, just looking through, I might have this around 4 and maybe even 5, depending on my mood, from their entire catalog. So I see your eyes, Ken, so you can get back at me. But Snow Goose and Mood Madness, and this will probably be the one that people will roll their eyes. I love A Nod and a Wink. I love it. I know Guy LeBlanc, I believe, plays on that one. His drummer, I think from Nathan Mall, played on that as well when Andy recruited them. But I think it's a great record. Unfortunately, it's the last one we ever got from them. Yeah. But I mean, Mirage, I did give it a 4-star. So it's pretty high up in a ranking, but there's just a few that I do really feel like are more realized maybe than Mirage to me. But obviously I'm going against the grain with Rate Your Music and things like that. So, but great record.
Do you feel like, there's not a lot of vocals on the album?
Yep.
Right. And they've done like a lot of like albums that are mostly instrumental, and they've done some that are more vocal oriented. Do you think more vocals on this album would have helped, or the fact that neither Bardens or Latimer are great singers, the fact that they kept it to somewhat of a minimum helped here?
I mean, they don't turn me off in that sense. I think there's enough there. It's hard to gauge. I think now coming out with an instrumental record, I mean, where did you say this landed on Billboard when it came out in the US?
149.
149. I guess it's hard to say. It's not, they're not vocals that put me off, but at the same time, I do feel like Camel, that may have been something that kind of kept them second tier, if you will. I don't know. I don't know how they did in the UK. I'm sure they probably sold better than they did here, but I can't say that for sure. I didn't look that up. No, not really. No. But it doesn't hinder the record at all. I always kind of hammer vocals. So I like the instrumental stuff, and I think there's some great passages on this, and the vocals I don't mind. They just don't particularly stand out to me as anything, stellar, but they don't do anything to push the record aside either. So,
okay. So we got a 4 out of 5 star from Eric, and favorite song you said is Free Fall?
Free Fall, the opener.
Free Fall. Okay. All right, let's move on to Ken. Your thoughts on Mirage?
Well, for me, it's one of the greatest prog rock albums of all time. I mean, I listened to it 3 times in the past 2 days, and I still get the feels from this album. My problem is that I need a bigger desert island. I think I'm going to have to take, an annex part of Anthony's desert island, because he only has 5 albums on his desert island. So, I got into the band about 45 years ago. And when I first started listening to prog, I guess I picked up with them. It was right around, I guess it was after Mood Madness came out. And I have a different perception. I always had a very different perception of the band. Bardens was by far the best known of all the members. I always thought of it as Bardens, who was the force that was the glue that put the band together. The other three guys were the backup band for Philip Goodhand Tate. And Barnes was in them with Van Morrison, right? And then he put out two solo albums, two not bad solo albums for Transatlantic. In fact, when Camel first got together, they used to they did God of Light, which was on one of Barton's solo albums. So if you had the Greasy Truckers album, you could hear this incredible live version of God of Light. So the first, just to give I'll just try and be as concise as I can and give you my feelings about Camel as like a little bit of an overview. Their first album I thought was a good but not great album. It was like the calling card. I think that to me, Latimer and Barnes were the team. Revisiting Mirage and having listened to it 3 times in the last couple of days, it really jumped out at me how much space Latimer had on the album. I mean, there's plenty of great Pete Bartons on this album, but Latimer really stands out. And eventually, Bartons leaves, and it's clearly Andy's show. I think the music moved into a more symphonic direction. Very fine albums. I mean, this is a band that consistently put out great records over the years. It's not like all of a sudden it's like, oh man, what about that one? That's a real stinker. There was nothing like that in the catalog. Well, maybe a wink and a nod. But they went more symphonic, and I think that even though they had great keyboard players, Kit Watkins, Jan Shellhouse, right? I think Bartons was the perfect foil for Andy. There was that interplay between the guitar and the organ, the mini Moog. You had the Mellotron in there. Maybe it's just a little more old school and just a little bit less symphonic than Nude and I Can See Your House from Here. Fine albums. Slightly more commercial, I think. But to me, this album kind of embodies prog rock. I mean, this is one of the greats. Do you want me to go through the tracks? I'll gladly go through the tracks. I mean, Free Fall. I mean, I think that's kind of like the calling card on the album. It's the heaviest track on the album. There's really great interplay between Latimer on piano and Barnes. Barnes on piano and Latimer on guitar, and then the organ kicks in. Andy's not a great singer. He's not a horrible singer. He's a serviceable singer, and frankly, I may be out of bounds by saying this. Later on, when Richard Sinclair was singing, I think that was a big upgrade later on, for like Rain Dance, stuff like that. Super Twister, the first instrumental, to me, it's like the counterbalance to Free Fall. It's probably the lightest piece. That's like the showcase for Latimer's flute playing. There's some very nice organ on it, but the focus always kind of comes back to the flute. Nimrodal Procession, White Rider, one of the long piece. I mean, it's pure wizard rock. I mean, it's a tune about Gandalf, right? So it's one of the 2 best tracks on the album. It's 2 of the epics. You got the flute, you got the Mellotron, you got incredible guitar from Latimer. But then it becomes a showcase. I feel it becomes a showcase for Pete Bartons. First on organ, and then he lays down some just totally treacherous mini Moog. Then you get that fat, I think it's a synthesizer. I don't think it's a Taurus pedal.
It's a synth.
Yeah, it sounds like this fat bass line.
Yeah, there's a clean bass, and then there's the synth on top. It's fucking
right. And
awesome.
then the track ends with like this mind fuck of a guitar solo that just like goes out into space. And I think it's just an amazing piece. To me, it's one of the 2 iconic Camel tracks from the entire from all of their albums. Second side, I still think in terms of vinyl, side 2 kicks up with Earthrise, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Super Twister. It's kind of upbeat. The albums, as I mentioned, I think the album is like a showcase for Andy. Bartons really stands out on this particular track, and he plays some just phenomenal organ on it. And there's just this great energy. And then you come to Lady Fantasy. I mean, that's the epic. I mean, it's it's the knockout punch. It's one of the iconic prog rock tracks of all time. I mean, everything is there. You've got Latimer and Bardens playing these unison lines on guitar and organ. Andy's vocals don't annoy me at all. They're just they are what they are, and everybody gets a chance. You know, after about 4 minutes, they're off to the races, and just when you think that there's like some definitive moment, there's another one that comes along. It's just, you know, it's just a career, you know, from a career that had many memorable guitar moments. Lady Fantasy, I mean, spotlights Andy Latimer's most lyrical solo. It's just, you know, then you have this build up, this quiet tension, and then it ends with like all hell breaking loose. You get this guitar organ frenzy, and then the main theme comes back in. I mean, man, I'm like ready to jizz by the end of the album. It's just, you know, I think it's a great record. It really is a great record. I hadn't listened to it in a long time. You know, it's like, it's part of my DNA. It was not a chore to listen to this record. It's also kind of short. So, you know, like I said, I listened to it 3 times in the last 2 days. I don't remember the last time I listened to something 3 times in a couple of days, but it was fun. It's just fun. Every time you listen to it, I hear a little something else. Great record. And I got to say, to anybody watching this, the worst song on this album is much better than anything you're listening to right now. So, great record. Camel-Mirage, really one of the greats. So, I'm counterbalancing everything Eric said.
Ken, do you think Camel were maybe 2 years late to prog rock's big heyday?
Yeah, you know, I don't know. They got, you know, they were signed to Janus over here, which I think that was part of Mercury. They only came over here like once, I think. They toured in '74. I know, yeah, somebody's going to say, like Rand's going to comment and say, no, I saw him in 1977, you know, in San Rafael, whatever, you know. Yeah, because Andy was living in California, I think, in the '70s, and he put together a band, and they played like a few shows late in the '70s, but really they never had a presence here. They were a little late to the party. I mean, if you think about it, Pete, the first album was '73.
Yeah.
Right. And so, right, I think it was '73. When
Yeah, it was the year before this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they weren't very late to the party.
No, but like, you know, like a lot of the other bands who were becoming, you know, like Yes and Genesis and Jethro Tull and ELP, 71, 72, they were doing really big things. So these guys come a little bit after that.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, I can't speak for their management. I don't know their management, but, you know, Decca is certainly a fine label, right? You would think. I don't know what their sales were like in the UK. They had to have been better than they were here, because their record, they were like non-existent over here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe a little late, not radically late. I mean, there's, you know, there were a ton of, you know, 1973, we did that year, right? That was the year for prog rock. And, you know, I mean, prog rock hit the wall in 77, 78. That was, you know, that was the end of the story. So there was certainly plenty of room for them to come over here and do a lot of touring and try and get a foothold, you know. But they, you know, they were like many of those British bands that had some notoriety in Europe, but they were absolutely non-existent over here.
Yeah. Lewis.
All right. I just want to open up by saying I'm not the world's biggest Camel fan, although I do love the records, some of them, not all of them. This is one of the ones that I do love. I came into the band much later. I think the first record I got from them was this one from Chris Lemke at Orion Studios sometime in the 90s, like the 96 or so. To me, overall, I think the record has a perfect length. This is the LP era. I think it's, I am not a fan of the singing, and I am definitely not a fan of the fucking lyrics. Just straight up. I mean, I would like to quote a few of these things. You know, I'm in a free fall, like a snowflake falling down, 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 down. I close my eyes, inside my head, I starfall, helpless to the ground. I don't know what the fuck a starfall is, but down, 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 down. Oh yeah, so maybe it's not so bad that he's falling. Smoke rings around me and bright sparks of fire flash by as I go. I've got the feeling and it takes me higher than I'll ever know. Go, 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 ooh. All right. So right there and then, for me, that's a fucking turnoff, and a big one. Because if the lyrics don't matter, why the fuck do you have them there in the first place? It's as simple as that. This is my position, and I know that people disagree. In the language of Winnie the Pooh, I have zero bothers to give. That's just how I listen to music. I think if it has words, the words have to be as good as the music. Otherwise, don't fucking put them there. Now, musically, though, that's an entirely different conversation, right? I think Free Fall is a masterful composition. I don't know. I don't have the CD with me. I don't know who wrote it, but I think Eric mentioned it's or
I think it's a Barnes
tune. It is a wonderful thing. I mean, in fact, it was so good that when we were giving this assignment, I couldn't help but transcribe it, because I just had to listen to it and pay attention to it, and I just wrote it out. And it's a fucking great song. I mean, it just starts with this pulse in F, right? Then to the G sharp below that, and then and then they do these great polyrhythms. They do this 3/4, 3/4, 3/4, 3/8 over an A and a C. I love everything they're doing in this song, and they have this tendency to do these very slow, mellow things, and then these fast, almost flamenco tempoed threes. But they resist the temptation to play an 11. They do it. They do that. It's really cool. So to me, I just love the music. I think I agree with what Ken said. I think that Peter Bardens is the star of the show on this album to me. Latimer plays great, no doubt about it. But I do think, and this is just my impression of it, the way they handle the moods, the fast and the slow, is a little bit off-putting to me. Like I wish that when they kick, they stayed in that vibe a little longer. Or if they're gonna go mellow, then be mellow, right? But the way they put them together is just not my preference, but it's great. I mean, it works, right? I'm not gonna sit here and shit on it because it's a classic for a reason. Now, I don't really know what people rate the records as, and I don't really care what other people think, but I do know that the overall composition of this record is of extremely high quality. I would be a little different. I wouldn't say that Free Fall is my favorite. I think with the exception of the lyrics, the Gandalf stuff, I think the White Rider is the best musical moment of the album for me, because that thing has everything that I like to hear in prog. So that to me is a highlight. And Lady Fantasy, I understand why people like it. I understand that it's unimpeachable, right? It's just not my particular preference, but it is a great song. Now, Earthrise, and I know this is going to piss off some of the prog heads, but to me, it just sounds like somebody invited the gnomes over for breakfast. A little.
Uh-oh.
The internet just stepped on his line.
Oh, geez. Right in mid-sentence. I was like ready to hear the rest of it.
I was waiting for that one.
Oh,
It is.
Looked like he had a stroke.
I don't know what to say. But am I back? I don't know if I'm back.
You're back. We're gonna have to do all that again.
Yeah.
We missed that whole thing. We were like waiting, and I'm like, so
yeah,
Earthrise.
Earthrise is a song that to me sounds like somebody invited a party of gnomes for breakfast, and they come in bouncy and happy, and I'm just not into it. This is not for me, right? Super Twister, I think, is like Ken said, those two songs are they're related in a way. And you get to see a theme that's going to be there in Camel always. This fast threes that never quite kick, but they tease you with a kick. It's like a lap dance of we're going to kick you, right? To then the soft stuff that they play. it's a beautiful record. And I think if people haven't heard it, they in any way are interested in prog, this is something they have to hear, right? But for me, the lyrics especially don't work. I'm not even sure why they called that second track Super Twister, because I think that musically there's other parts of this record that are much more treacherous and much more adventurous. But I love it.
Actually, they should have reversed it. That track should have been called Earthrise.
Maybe, yeah,
All right.
because
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. And
Super Twister sounds like it should be something snaking and complex. And
Yeah.
tempo, and it's really not. Yeah.
it's not. So, but it's a great record, and I love it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a classic for a reason. You know.
Louis, do you think that this album may be a little bit too eclectic for mainstream tastes, and that's why this album didn't really do that well? I'm here, especially where albums by Yes and Jethro Tull and Genesis and ELP were doing big business around this time.
I don't think it's more eclectic than Thick as a Brick, and that sold a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's the issue. I think that the issue is that, and I mean, I can't say for sure, but as somebody who came into the band later, compared to Jethro Tull or even Gentle Giant, they were sometimes a little too soft. Like even Yes, with all the things I don't like about Yes, when they kicked, man, they fucking kicked, right? There was no, they didn't come to fuck around. When they were gonna play music, they took your head off. And I think that's the only aspect about Camel that sometimes was there, as in segments of Lady Fantasy or Nimbledale or Freefall, but then it was all gone, And that was my first impression when I heard it. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think if you want to understand how a record does, and you need a lot of listening to a record for it to really do well, then it's likely not to do well because people don't listen that much. But I love it. I mean, I'm not putting it down, but I am saying it wasn't as immediately forceful as when you play Tarkus or something like that, right? That instantly your life is different.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to say, one thing that differentiates Camel from the other bands you guys just mentioned is those bands had very significant frontmen, right? You had Ian Anderson, you had John 100%. Anderson,
yes,
you had Greg Lake, you had the voice. Now, vocals were secondary in the case of Camel. They weren't an instrumental band. Vocals were just there. They never had, that's, as I mentioned before, for me, I like when Richard Sinclair was singing in the band because he had character, whether you liked his voice or not, he had a very unique sound, and when you had Latimer and Barden's harmonizing, it was okay. That's the best you could say about it. It was inoffensive. Whereas, you had, John Anderson, you had Ian Anderson. I mean, these were guys that had presence, and Camel never had that. They never, that was never. These guys were more about playing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But videos of them, man, these guys, and they were killing it on stage.
Yeah. If you listen to Freefall, for example, and I think Ken makes a very good point. If you listen to the melody itself is quite good, actually, but it is delivered in a very robotic way. And it almost makes me wish they had just put a vocoder on it. Like, if you're going to sing it like that, then go all the way, right? Just tell me you're a fucking robot and let's get on with it, right? I think, this is the thing for me. I think that, and you're right, that when Sinclair was singing with them, automatically he's a more convincing singer, right?
And he has style. He had style,
Yes.
He had a sound,
And these guys, it's almost like you're not sure if they're trying to sing or if it's like an inside joke. There's a little bit of that because it's almost like they're talking to you, right? Almost. So it's a little weird when I first heard it. To me, it was weird. I didn't really get it. I know the other bands at the time, they didn't do that. Can
we put one thing to rest? Camel was not a Canterbury band. So,
correct.
I agree.
And everybody always said, because Richard Sinclair was in the band. He sang and he played bass on a couple. They were not a Canterbury band. They had nothing to do with Canterbury. So anyway.
One thing before we move on to George, one thing I do want to mention, because Lewis brought up the whole lyric aspect of it. And I think some of these other bands, and I'll use Tull and Yes as perfect examples, even Genesis to an extent, they had songs with lyrics that I think to this whole post hippie culture were deemed very interesting and very intellectual, right? So in addition to having the front man out there, like you guys just mentioned, they had songs with lyrics that you could sit and read and be kind of fascinated with and maybe not quite understand, but they would still stimulate something, which maybe Camel early on, not quite doing that. Right. It's like it's all about the music here, and that's fine. Right. But as we saw, bands that concentrated heavily on the musical aspect of it, I'll use King Crimson as an example here. We're doing these songs with these weird time signatures and lengthy instrumental bits and stuff like that. And those bands tended to not draw and sell as much as the other bands we just mentioned. So that could have something to do with it as well.
Hopefully, while we've been talking, George pulled up all the Sonus Umbra lyrics.
Oh, I can recite them if we want to have a good laugh. But I can tell you this, you will never find in a Sonus Umbra song a passage such as, listen very carefully, my words are about to unfold, concerning a lady I've seen, but I could never hold. So this is the thing, right? I mean, that's just not for me.
Yeah.
But it is for somebody, just not me.
Luis Nasser, misogynist. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, maybe it's a
Just
dog.
saying.
I can see by your smile, take a long while, the words that come through, I see that they're true. For sure reminds me of you. Don't misunderstand me. It's not always easy to say. The words in your head and your heart that you just can't explain. I can see clearly a face in the sky, moons in your eye. You're passing me by. Tell me the reason why.
I've heard worse. I gotta say,
I think we all have, but yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
I'm not saying it's great, but I've heard worse.
But
So
do you agree
George-
with me? But just before we go to George, do you agree with me that that level of writing lyrics does not in any way match up to the level of the music?
Yeah, sure. And maybe
And that's the only thing I don't like about it. It's like, come on, guys, you put all this effort into the music and then you just, you do Chinese fortune cookie lyrics.
so they should have brought in Pete Sinfield.
Should have brought in somebody. I don't know.
Hopefully not Pete Sinfield.
So George is our resident fusion expert and lover of all things instrumental music. And knowing how well this band did with this format on a future album, right? That the great Snow Goose album. What is your take on Mirage? And do you think that this album would have been better as a fully embraced instrumental outing, or is it the way that it was done? Is that good enough? And it's fine.
I think it's good enough. Obviously, I can picture it without vocals, but I don't know that it's better. I'll echo what Eric said, and that's not me sticking up for the vocal work because I think it's kind of average. But I don't know. I don't hear it and go, I wish it was instrumental. For what it's worth, I have a way different origin than you guys because I didn't hear this album or this band until about 5 years ago.
Oh.
Nobody in my crowd liked them. I swear to God, I've never heard these guys on the radio here ever.
No,
so I just was.
Neither did I.
Yeah, I didn't know different markets, different stuff, but yeah, they were just not on my radar until about 5 years ago. I just decided to do a deep dive on 70s stuff because I looked at my collection. I said it's short there, so I just deep dived, and it was one of the bands, Prog Archives and Rate Your Music had high, this album in particular. So I got the first four, and yeah, this is my favorite of those four. Free Fall is my favorite track also because it's the most aggressive probably. I think the vocals there are the most effective out of the three vocal tunes. Least effective on Lady Fantasy. To me, that melody's not for him. He doesn't pull that one off. Nimrodel would be my other favorite track. I especially like that section, the White Rider section. That is really cool. I feel like Earthrise and Lady Fantasy maybe overstay their welcome with the jamming. I'm not that impressed with them as players. and it tends to run on a little bit in those tunes. But Super Twister I enjoy. It's mellow, but it's very melodic. I really like that tune. I would say I would agree with the take that Barden's is the driving force of this, although Latimer seems to get more of the praise on boards and stuff. I don't know. For me, I hear Barden's in it, and I see him in the credits more, so I always give credit for who writes the songs. I actually, when I did that, checked out their albums, I didn't like Snow Goose as much as the other ones, even though it's instrumental. So I don't know what that says. It was a little austere for me, just a little, I couldn't warm up to it.
Well, it's very orchestrated.
Yeah, it's a little laid back too. I think people, everybody talks about Latimer and his beautiful phrasing and sense of melody, right? Which is absolutely true. And I think that the tone of the Snow Goose album is very much perfect for his style of guitar playing, and along with the orchestral bits and his that sweet tone is, I think that's what makes the Snow Goose such a lovely album and such a beloved album, because it is so melodic and just so like this wonderful little piece of music. I mean, there's some aggressive for me. I mean, do you guys agree this is probably the heaviest Camel album? There's some pretty rocking stuff on this album in spots.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with Lewis. There's a lot of back and forth with them. You'll have something on an album like even I Can See Your House From Here. The opening Wait, even though it's very poppy, has that punch to it. And then you'll go right into something that's mellow. They do change it up a lot, where they don't stay. So I would agree with you. I think this is probably the heaviest of what they've done overall in their career.
One thing, and I would like to know what you guys think about this. One criticism that I heard a lot from people who were not into prog about prog is that in prog, you have these blazing keyboard solos, and then you have these slow, weepy guitar solos. And I think to some extent, that's not necessarily unfair. Obviously, they haven't heard some of the others. They haven't really heard everything, but I think that Camel is a poster child of that recipe. I think that Latimer style is always very, very, very slow and melodic. And unlike Gilmour, this guy can play faster tempos, and he does expertly in freefall. That's one thing that people don't normally talk about, that Gilmour is like a mono-tempo guy, right? Slower prodding is his thing. But yet, you never get an aggressive guitar tone like you do some of these other guys. It's always very dialed back. And this is the thing, I sometimes wish they would have kicked it up. Like the White Rider is a perfect example of a part where they do kick it up. But that's kind of rare for their catalog, I think. I can't think of many other examples that are like that. And I think that they would have benefited from that because they were so instrumental. Then the more light and dark in that formula would have probably been better. I don't know, but I've always heard people complain that the guitars are not really ever exploding. They're just sort of, it's almost like that's the vocal melody in a way. They're very beautiful melodies, but they're not necessarily always guitar solos. And I find it hard to disagree in some cases, but I think Camel is is what always comes to mind when people tell me this. I keep thinking of Camel records, because that's what I think when I hear them.
Do you think a little like King Crimson dissonance or a little Fripp explosiveness would have added a unique element to their music, do you think?
Well, the thing is that Fripp and Latimer couldn't be more poles apart.
I know. Yeah, I'm just saying with that.
I think just a little more, somebody give Latimer a tube screamer pedal, something every now and then. I don't know. This is what I'm thinking. I think, and look, I'm not putting the guy down. He's a fucking icon for very many good reasons. I'm just saying, sometimes the music could have done better. I mean, bottom line, let's just talk fucking physics. A distortion pedal adds harmonic content to your signal. That's what it does. So it just gives a richness to the sound that is otherwise not there, and that helps. It's that's all it is. So I would have liked to have heard that. That was the one magic of Gilmour. Gilmour had his delay, his there's a song on this record that has that phaser effect that Gilmore liked. I think it's which one is it? The one that starts with a Nimrodel, the super heavy phase guitar, right? You know, the little arpeggio with a phaser.
Yep.
That phaser is a great addition to any guitar tone because it you know, the little push and pull. So it just fattens up the tone automatically. And then if you put it through a fuzz pedal, it's automatically better, right? You're playing the exact same shit, but it just sounds so much better. And I think this is something that was missing. They were a little timid with distortion. I think it's just a matter that they could have used a little bit more tasteful distortion. It's a little too pastoral for a guy who grew up listening to metal, which is me, right?
I find that Barden's keyboards at times have that aggression and that attack that adds
Yes.
to the music, right? Yeah.
That fuzz line in the White Rider, that's just fucking perfect, right?
I think, and the organ in Earthrise, I think, has a
Yeah.
lot of balls to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So imagine now doing that to the guitar. It's a different timbre, but now it automatically it makes the softer parts that much more beautiful in comparison.
Yeah.
And it makes
There were
It
some
might
parts-
go back to Ken's point, but do you think Latimer maybe sat back a little bit because Barden's was the guy? Because I do think, Lewis, as you go on, his tone does get a little more aggressive on some of those albums post Barden's. Not metal tone, but I mean, there
No.
are things, you know, there
Metal
are
tone-
things that are more aggressive.
Yes, but it's always been.
No,
Well, I don't
Turbo
know.
has that. They have that
Yeah,
laid back thing going on.
they do.
I mean, I'll agree with Ken. He said it right at the beginning of the episode. It's like, you know, when Barden's left this band, I think they lost a little bit on the keyboard side of things. There was an edge, I think, that he brought that I always really liked. And I like, they've had plenty of fine keyboard players since, and they've all done fine stuff. But for me, I think the reason why I like the early albums so much is because of Peter Barden's. And, you know, there's like, I mean, I like, to me, you know, Free Fall, which is more of like a horror rock song on the album, you know, lyrics notwithstanding. I mean, there's like this kind of like Deep Purple guitar organ interplay thing going on throughout that song that, as a huge fan of Deep Purple, I absolutely love. And I wish they would have done more in that kind of style, because I think they do it absolutely terrific. And you hear moments of it on Laney Fantasy as well. You know, that big pumping bass, and then the guitar and organ solos towards the second half of the song. I mean, just absolutely amazing stuff. And I like the more rockin', up tempo, aggressive Camel. And I know I think Camel has this distinction of being one of, you know, all these, you know, top or second tier prog bands. They're the gorgeous prog band, right? Like, all their music is so beautiful, and they have that kind of that stigma about them. But yet most people, when they talk about, you know, their favorite Camel albums, you know, like you said, Rate Your Music, this is the number one. This is the most aggressive album they have. So just interesting how that.
And there's another thing that which I want to point out, which happened to me. When you first hear it, you're taken by that softness. That's the envelope that hits you, right? But if you give it a chance and you listen to it more, you realize that just in Free Fall alone, right? Forget all the other stuff that happens here. Just in Free Fall, there is a lot more polyrhythmic mastery displayed than in the entire discography of Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Straight up. These guys are playing through fast 11/8 and 13/8 and then back to 5s and 3s seamlessly and melodically and very tastefully, right? So it takes a while, you know, it takes a particular kind of listening experience to pick that up. And then once you do, then the respect for the music automatically goes up. But you have, I think, you know, for reason, it's the first thing. And if that's your, you know.
We lost a lot of that, Lewis.
Well, I'm sorry,
You look like you're back.
but
Take the computer.
We'll overdub it in post-production.
You do the best.
let's just say that
Can I do it? Pete, can I do the overdubbing? Hola.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we have a lot of
Hola, amigos.
Oh, kick off.
we have a lot of positive things to say about this album. So I guess my final question for the team here is, would you consider, if we're talking to folks who are fairly new to progressive rock and 70s progressive rock, and you can talk about some of the iconic albums that have been released by all the various bands. I mean, would you put Mirage in like a top 10 must-hear 70s prog classic? Like, I mean, Ken, obviously your answer is yes to that, right?
Oh yeah, I think that somebody who's curious, I think they poop their pants listening to this album. Yeah,
Whether
I mean,
they want to or not is another thing.
well, that's something else. But but yeah, I mean, it's got the magic, and it has the elements that it has those prog rock elements, and it's not my favorite album of all time. Everybody knows what my favorite album is of all time. But like I said, I'm already building that annex, on my desert island, and Mirage it's right there, right up there.
I would call it an essential 70s prog rock album.
Yeah, the way I look at it is if I tend to be of this mindset, like if I'm going to recommend 10 Desert Island 70s prog albums to someone who's really not all that familiar with progressive rock, I'm the kind of guy who would be like, well, I want one album from Yes, I want one album from Genesis, one album from King Crimson, so on and so forth, rather than give them 3 Yes albums and 2 whatever. And I could probably easily put Mirage in that list of 10. Eric, would you do the same?
I'd give him Snow Goose.
Okay,
I
all right,
agree
well,
that-
that's
I
fair.
agree that Camel should be in there, like you were saying. You're going to give him the big names, Gentle Giant, so on and so on. But I would go with Snow Goose over Mirage.
Yeah, I'm not anti-Snow Goose. I love Snow Goose, but the fact that it's an all instrumental album, I think to hand it off to somebody who's not a prog rock person, to them it would almost like, and it's so heavily orchestrated, it'd almost be like handing them like Tchaikovsky or something. I think it needs the vocals. As mediocre as the vocals are from Camel, I think it needs the vocals for the novice.
Okay.
It'd be a little bit more what they expect.
Yeah, I kind of look.
your taste
I
may
look
vary.
at it, Ken, I guess, as it's what impacted me.
You're not wrong. Well, you are wrong, but you're not really. No, I'm just giving you my perspective. Because like I said, Snow Goose is a phenomenal album. When we were talking about doing albums, I think we were originally talking about maybe the Snow Goose, and to me, I see it as this one big work. Yeah, there's Raider goes to town and Radio takes a shit and all that, but who knows? It's all one piece. It's one piece of music that just flows. Whereas this is songs, and I think if you handed somebody the Snow Goose, I think it would overwhelm them.
I agree with Ken.
I love the record, but it's not the first album I would hand somebody if I was going to hand them a Camel album or a prog rock album to get into.
Like the same thing with that Banco album that you like, right?
Terra, yeah.
Terra, yeah, that's not. It's acquired. It's acquired taste. If I wasn't going to give somebody Mirage, I would give them Moon Madness. I think Moon Madness is
Yeah, I love Moon Madness too.
Yeah, it's a great record, right? And the only thing that's better than Moon Madness is this. So,
the vocal melody, again, which is what a lot of people hang on to, a Free Fall, is a fucking great vocal melody. It really is. It's just not delivered in a way that is conventional, but it's such a fucking good melody that it, even if you don't really understand why they sang it like that, you're going to remember that. Instantly, it goes into your head and it's never gone. And that is a very big, strong point of Mirage. The very first song, because you got to remember, people aren't necessarily going to hear the whole fucking thing, right? So if the very first song grabs them,
right,
that's a strong thing. And a Free Fall is an ideal, I think, one of their best openers.
It's the first song I ever heard from the band, and I actually
Yeah.
was disappointed that they didn't do a lot of other stuff like that.
So I was going to ask you that, Pete. Was this your first Camel record?
Yes.
It was, okay.
But I also got into them late. I didn't get into Camel till probably like early 90s. I
Okay.
had never listened to them before.
So you and I are similar. We were mostly into metal, and then got into prog later.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is my experience with it. It's
I actually got into Camel and Gentle Giant right around the same time, and both the bands couldn't be any different, right? And I remember thinking, well, this band is kind of, they're much more melodic, and these kind of lengthy guitar solos and keyboard solos, and then there's this other thing. And this other thing was all over the place, these short little crazy complex songs, weird sounding from one style to the next. And I was like, wow, this is like, they couldn't be any different. And at first I was kind of like, I was really drawn to the stuff that Gentle Giant were doing. And it took me a few years to kind of really open myself up to the music of Camel. Because again, once I started listening past like the first few albums, they started to get a little more kind of poppy and a little bit more accessible sounding. And at the time I was kind of like, I'm not sure I like the latter period albums, but I grew to love them, right? It just took a while. But but this, I was always drawn to this album.
Well, it was kind of what Ken said to me with Soft Machine when I was like, oh, I like Bundles, but I hate Third. He's like, it's a different band.
It's a different band.
Really, latter period Camel's a different band than these were the four guys, right? And then, like you said, Sinclair came in, hit Watkins. They've had and Sinclair kind of changes the dynamic because it's a completely different vocal style than what you got from Andy and Pete Barton. So
if you want to hear Camel at their probably raunchiest, go listen. You probably have to listen to it online because it's never come out on CD legit. Is the Greasy Truckers live at Dingwall's Dance Hall? They do God of Light Revisited. That was the Pete Barton's piece, but it's they stretch it out and it's a sidelong piece, and it's just like heavy guitar, organ, going back to what Pete was saying, like that. It's got more of that Deep Purple flavor, and that's Camel. That because that was early Camel. That was from '73. That was like when the first album, when they were touring for the first album. I got into, like I said, I got into them. Moon Madness had just come out, and so I was working backwards. There was Snow Goose, Mirage in the first album, and then when I picked up the Greasy Truckers, it had Gong on it, it had Camel on it, and it was fucking unbelievable. But then I picked up with the changeover with Richard Sinclair coming into the band, and you had Rain Dances and you had Breathless, and even though Barton's was still there, the sound changed a bit. I think that Sinclair was he was like the X factor. He really changed the flavor of the band. They got a little more commercial. They probably were under some pressure to be a little more commercial, and still fine albums.
Yeah. Some gorgeous stuff on those albums for sure.
Yeah. But and then more symphonic once he left. Once Barton's on. Pete Barton's made some decent solo albums.
Great player, great songwriter.
I got to see him play at the Bottom Line. Yeah, it was good.
Nice venue for that. Yeah, it's good. Great place.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, there you have it. A look at Mirage from Camel. So for those of you who are watching and know this album well, give some of your thoughts on this album down below. If you've never heard it, well, you know what the saying is. You got some homework to do. If you don't do your homework, Gary Joyce is going to be on you immediately. Right, Gary? That's right. The principal will know if you didn't do your homework. So go listen to the album, come back and report and let us know what you think, because it's a really good one. It's a classic for a reason. So tune in 2 weeks from tonight, where we'll have another episode of In the Prog Seat. We'll take a look at another album study, right? It's kind of what we're going to call these, like album studies, right? We're going to pick these albums apart and dissect them and all that good stuff. So stay tuned and visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube, all together, all
the damn time.
For George Lamy, Louis Nasser, who we're going to welcome back to the States in just a few short days, Ken Golden and Eric Porter. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you real soon here on the channel. I am Pete Pardo. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do click the like button. Very, very important. So we'll see you all real soon here on In the Prog Seat. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.